Today marks the 73rd anniversary of the Palestinian Nakba, or in English, catastrophe, when 700,000 Palestinians fled or were driven from their homes by the Israeli armies. They were never allowed to return. In the Six-Day War of 1967, Israel took what was left of the country by force and has been occupying the West Bank and controlling Gaza ever since. The catastrophe continues as Israel takes ever more land and the Palestinians lose more and more of their human and civil rights, while the world stands by.
About the conversation you'd had.
Tonight, we shall hear from East Jerusalem and Bethlehem of the systematic state violence against Palestinians, which is happening right now. Events of the last week graphically illustrate this ongoing Nakba. The lamentation that follows has been prepared by people of faith from the Jewish, Christian, and Islamic traditions. Increasingly, people are speaking about the need to lament, be it about climate change or racism. If we don't engage emotionally, we can quickly despair, particularly when the facts are so uncompromisingly awful as they are in this one-sided and oppressive conflict. But lamentation can be a spur to engagement. So our hope is that you will lament with us tonight, but also be spurred on to act. We'll begin by looking at some current footage telling the stories of Palestinians in Sheikh Jarrah in East Jerusalem being forced from their homes.
To me now from Sheikh Jarrah. Thank you very much for joining us. You grew up in the neighborhood. Your family home is slated for eviction. What is the scene right now?
Well, thank you so much for having me. To start, it's not really an eviction. It's forced ethnic displacement, to be accurate, because an eviction implies legal authority. While the Israeli occupation has no legitimate jurisdiction over the eastern parts of occupied Jerusalem under international law, it also implies the presence of a landlord, and certainly these Israeli settlers have not built our homes. They're not our landlords. They don't own our land. And thirdly, eviction does not imply the hundreds and hundreds of heavily armed police and army and settlers colluding, blowing up your doors, throwing your children from your windows, and using brute force to throw you out in the street and assaulting and arrest you should you resist. It doesn't imply the grenades. It doesn't imply the rubber-coated bullets. It's not an eviction. According to the UN and countless politicians and human rights organizations, it could amount to war crimes. Actually, the situation is pretty tense, I can tell you, and we're very scared of losing our homes to Israeli settler organizations.
You've written very powerfully about being 11 and remembering this incident that I spoke about these settlers coming to your home and taking half of it. How does it feel to have grown up with what you've called the anxiety of dispossession?
It feels familiar because this is what every Palestinian feels like under the crushing fangs of Israeli colonialism in Palestine. My grandmother was thrown out of her home in 1948 in Haifa, and she was thrown out again in 1967 and again in 2009 when Israeli settler organizations colluding with the Israeli state took over half of our home. And this is my second time being dispossessed from my family should they go ahead and do it to me. It's scary, but it also has a name. It's settler colonialism, and it's apartheid, and it's the fact that these settler organizations are working together with the state to exploit the law to dispossess Palestinians.
I can report that yesterday, Mohammed El-Kurd, who was speaking there, was forcibly removed from his home. He spoke about his mother being forcibly removed in 1948. From Haifa, and then having to being moved on again, pushed into the from her home in the West Bank. I'd now like to introduce to you Faiz Abdeen, who is a doctor and an anaesthetist working in Birmingham. He grew up in Jordan following his family's expulsion from Palestine. His father is from Nablus in the West Bank, and his mother from Haifa, a town now in Israel. He's going to speak to us about the right of return and what it means to be a refugee.
Thanks very much for all of you and for letting me joining this fantastic event and give me an opportunity to explain our understanding about Nakba. Firstly, I'm Abdeen Faiz. My job title is anesthetic practitioner. So I'm not a doctor. I got in my way the master degree in pain management, and also I got a master degree in Sharia law. I born in a refugee camp in Zarqa city in Jordan. My father from Nablus city, or actually from a village in Nablus called Beta, and one of our relatives yesterday has been shot by Israeli militant, and he is shaheed, passed away. And my mom was born in Java or Jaffa in a village called Salama. So my mom born in 1933. What you see today in Al-Jarrah or Al-Sheikh Jarrah ward or Hay Al-Sheikh Jarrah, that happened to my mom actually in 1948, exactly. So some of her family members being killed, her father and her sister and 6 brothers had to run away from their village Salama to the West Bank to the Nablus city when she was 15 years old. And that story, it's repeated again in 1967 for her. So she ran away with my father from Nablus city to Jordan, and she spent her life in the Zarqa refugee camp in Jordan. So almost 70 years in refugee camp. When I came to the UK and got my job with the NHS, I asked her and I begged her to come to live with me in the UK. Try just to give her some relax, some nice life at the end of her life. She refused and she cried and said to me, listen, Mom, I will spend my life in this refugee camp until I go back to Jaffa. There is no place on the earth more beautiful than Jaffa, than Java. There is no place on the earth will be better than my childhood place. So I'm not going to any place on the earth. Either I pass away in this refugee camp or go back to Java and pass away or die over there. And unfortunately, she passed away 2 years ago in a Zarqa refugee camp when she was 85 years old. This is the story of my mom. And to be honest, my mom has taught us a lot. She told me a story about her childhood. And that story was about their neighbors. And one of the neighbors' families were Jews. And she said in 1930s, we used to live peacefully with our Jewish neighbors. And that Jewish mother used to come to my mom when she is sick and help her at home. And the same thing my mother said, my mom used to go to help her neighbor, Jewish neighbor. And I used to play with her daughter. We didn't feel any differentiation between us, Muslims or Christians or Jewish. And that in 1933 or in 1930s. But she said to me later in 1948, we've seen completely different Jewish who are, I believe that what she said, I believe they are not Jewish because they were very aggressive. They were killing everybody, soldiers. We don't know where they come from. They're not like our neighbors, Jewish neighbors who used to live peacefully together and enjoy our time, cooking for my mom cooking for them, and play together, spending all the time nicely and peacefully together. So could you imagine that lovely, smooth, beautiful life was destroyed by Israel? That dream was destroyed for them. This is to show that what my mom taught me and my brothers, that our problem actually not with Jews at all. We have no problem with religion. We have no problem with the Christians. We have no problem with any human being on the earth. Our problem with the Zionists, with the Zionism, who has taken our lands, who has taken our homes, who's still kicking out the Palestinians from their house. This is the third Nakba for those people who are living in Sheikh Jarrah today. They moved from Haifa. And then after that, in 1967, they moved to Sheikh Jarrah. And today, we don't know where they are going to move to. Anyway, I think, according to our story with Nakba, this is the most important issue to focus on, which is the main problem is not with Jewish, the problem with Zionism, the problem with what they call it Israel, the apartheid state, the apartheid racist terrorist state, who doesn't respect any international resolution. Israel didn't implement any international resolution until now. And the international community and the Security Council and the United Nations, unfortunately, until now, cannot force Israel to implement any resolution or even to treat Palestinians nicely or to give them their right. So at the moment, I believe I still have the right to go back to my mom home and to my mom's land in Jaffa. This is my right. And also I have the right to go back to my father's house in Beta, in Nablus. That is the history, that is the memory for all of us as brothers and sisters. And to be honest with you, about the peace process, I'm not happy with it. Because if I want to accept the peace with Israel according to the two states, that means I have to forget my mom's house, which is impossible. I can't, as a Palestinian, forget my identity. My mom is my identity. My mom is my blood. I can't throw away my blood or forget it. So this is my right. And, and I believe that the resolution to end this Nakba for Palestinians should be by returning all Palestinians for their homes and land, to live peacefully with the people who used to live with them from Jewish or Christians before 1947 or 1948. That's what we believe. They are our neighbors, they are our brothers, they are our sisters. It doesn't matter what religion they are believe or follow. This is the right resolution to get our rights and to get our history, actually, that my mom and father used to live with.
Thank you for your very personal story, which and for sharing it, and for your obvious passion. It's so powerful to hear that this Nakba continues. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Now I'd like to introduce Diana Neslin, an observant Jew who grew up in South Africa under apartheid. She emigrated to Israel and now living in London, she works tirelessly for a just peace in Israel-Palestine. Thank you, Diana.
Thank you, and thank you to Faiz for that very powerful introduction to our evening tonight. Today we meet under the shadow of the terror unleashed by the Israeli state. We watch with horror its increasing violent destruction and feel helpless. While I condemn the rockets emanating from Gaza, I am aware that Israel has an effective Iron Dome defense and civilian shelters befitting a powerful state, while the people imprisoned in Gaza have no such defense against the terror, both from the skies and from artillery bombardments. Many Jews like me reject Israel's claim to speak for all Jews and recognize that the Nakba continues. It was learning about the Nakba that enlightened me to the nature of the state. Mine was among the first cohort to receive a Jewish education following the Second World War and the establishment of Israel. I learned what all young Jews have subsequently learned. We were told that Israel was the fulfillment of a dream, and that now at last we had a place of our own, and that no longer would we be subjects of oppression because we now had a country. We were not told much about the Holocaust, but were very much aware of it and felt in some way that Israel had grown like a phoenix from the terrible ashes of that time. We learned about what was called the War of Independence. We were told that the Arab armies invaded the fledgling state to drive the Jews into the sea. We were told that the Arab states had broadcast to the local people, inciting them to leave their homes in order to return behind the victorious armies to claim their rightful inheritance. We were encouraged to believe that Israel had made Jewish people stand tall again and be proud of its achievements. We learned Hebrew, and like many young Jews, I joined a Zionist youth group, hoping eventually to settle in Israel. South Africa, the country of my birth, was a racist state and one that privileged white people. Uncomfortable with that privilege, I planned to immigrate to the fledgling state of Israel and help build a more equitable society. And then, with my Zionist youth group, I visited Israel and saw with my own eyes that it was not an equal society. I learned that Palestinian and Arab lives were cheap. I saw the stratification of the society between Western and Arab Jews, which was an eye-opener. Western Jews were at the apex of the society, while Arab Jews were looked down on. I began to understand why Israeli group leaders were so keen to get young Western Jews to migrate to their country. When I returned to South Africa, I tried to discover what had really happened in 1948. I found material which told me about the Nakba. I read about the 500 villages destroyed, about the 750,000 refugees. Far from broadcasts by the Arab nations, a well-trained citizens' army had ethnically cleansed the population and had appropriated their property. Refugees were unable either to return or even to visit their country, while I, a South African, was encouraged to emigrate. I had been lied to by people I had learned to trust, and I felt betrayed. I learned over the years that this is a tool used by propagandists. It is extremely painful to leave the comfort of one's community in order to take a stand for truth, for justice, and for equality. But it is difficult to survive while closing one's eyes to oppression. This oppression is carried out in the name of the Jewish people, and I therefore feel a duty to distance myself from the racism, mendacity, and violence of the state. By so doing, I feel I'm following the Jewish precept, justice, justice shalt thou pursue. Who better to challenge the brutality of the Israeli state than those who have always had a stake in the community? If Jews begin to speak out, it unsettles those willing to defend Israel's egregious actions, which is probably why we're often targeted with such ferocity by Israel's propaganda army. The Nakba is a thread running through the story of the Palestinians. It was the crucible from which grew a powerful state, one whose propaganda continues to be peddled, even as it is used to displace ever more Palestinians, even as it feels emboldened to destroy lives, homes, and futures in the interest of Greater Israel. Today, we weep for Jerusalem, for Gaza, and for Palestine. The sorrow we feel must be challenged into action. Action not only to hold Israel accountable, but to recognize the complicity of the world in the ongoing subjugation of the Palestinian people. But above all, action to make it clear to the Western world, particularly Britain, which has played such a devastating part in the establishment and maintenance of Israel, that there is a price to pay for their complicity in the ongoing Nakba.
Thank you, Diana, for your powerful and well thought out testimony and your continuing courage as a Jew in speaking out and pursuing justice. It's now a great pleasure to ask the Reverend Nikki Davis to introduce Zugbi from a link in Bethlehem.
Thank you, Jonathan. Good evening, everyone. And I hope that Zugbi will be joining me any second now. Well, let me start by introducing Zugbi. So Zugbi is live with us from Bethlehem this evening. He is my friend and my former boss. He is the founder of the WIAM Center in Bethlehem itself. And I worked there for a month with Zugbi and the other team there. It is a center which offers mediation training and counseling to help resolve community disputes. Zugbi identifies as a living stone. In other words, he is a Christian Palestinian living under Israeli occupation. Hello, friend, I can see you now.
Yes.
Thank you for being here this evening.
Yes.
Now, I've been with you 3 times in Bethlehem, and I've actually witnessed firsthand the awfulness of Nakba Day itself. And of course, this year it's worse than ever. But the Nakba, as we know, is not just about one day, and it's not just about what's going on now, but it goes on every day, doesn't it, for Palestinians? And I wonder if you can start by telling me about children being arrested. Why are children arrested?
You know, children are the victims of the occupation. The whole Palestinian people is the victim of the occupation. And I don't know why they are arrested. It is the Israeli soldiers who arrest them, and they wanted to terrorize them, to inflict pain on them, to instill fear that they will be harassed in order not to let them do anything, move, or so on. And the last attack, or hopefully it will be the last attack on Gaza, many children were killed. 33 children were killed. You know, it is seriously to see that in the last shells, just yesterday, 10 people were killed and many of them were children. So Israel is creating a kind of a system to stop children from education, from learning new things, from terrorizing them, from putting them in jail. And this is not healthy at all.
Yeah, thank you. Now, when they do arrest the children, and in a minute we're going to see some images, some terrible images of some of that. I mean, they've, as far as I know, they're normally just throwing stones, normally, if they're doing anything at all. And then what happens about their confession? It seems to be that they're asked to sign something.
You know, the problem is my work is next to the apartheid wall. And imagine that even if children use stones or raise flags, what kind of insecurity they will bring to the Israeli occupation. Look at the walls, it's very tall and it is cement and barbed wires everywhere. So the message of the children saying that we don't want the occupation, as also all Palestinian people say, occupation is evil. So I find it no excuse for imprisoning children, and children should enjoy their life. They should enjoy their childhood and be away from all types of violence rather than to be the victims of violence. When they are taken to prison, and you know, the international law and Fourth Geneva Convention and all of the human rights laws should prevent the state of Israel from imprisoning children. And many times they are interrogated, and many times without any lawyer, and they will sign a paper. It is in another language, is in another situation, in very terrifying, fearful situation. And then, of course, you see, they put in jail, and it is against international law.
Yeah. Oh, thank you, Zugbi, for making that so clear. Thank you. Could you tell me about the ongoing home demolitions and what that does to people? And yeah, we saw the very first video. I hope you saw it. Was a young man who's just been evicted from his house. But something about the home demolitions and the illegal settlements.
You know, we are talking about the Nakba. And the Nakba didn't happen in 1948. It has been happening since 1948. And the Israeli continue with their politics and with their, settlement policy. And all of it is war crimes. We witnessed in this documentary how this family were evacuated, were kicked out from Haifa, and still are kicking out from Sheikh Jarrah. And that's really, the Israeli government is using what his name, anyhow, talking about the modalities of conquest. Modalities of conquest, and it comprises of 4 elements: extermination, expulsion, encirclement, and conquest. You know, Norman Finkelstein, he wrote about these 4 ways, stages to eliminate the cause of the Palestinians. And of course, demolishing houses is part of the collective punishment. And nowadays, in the war against Gaza, they demolished many houses, many houses, and it is really creating a lot of fear, trauma. We talked about the anxiety of dispossession, you know, and now the trauma of dispossessions, the trauma of destroying houses. If the houses are not available for people to live, how can really they continue to be human beings? Israel demolished many houses in the recent attacks in Gaza, and it is a massacre, it is ethnic cleansing, and it will continue to do that until the international community is awakened to stop this aggressive war. And we see nowadays the settlers are taking part in these attacks, and the settlers are terrorizing our people. And this continues to be part of the matrix of control, how to control people, how the whole policy of the occupation is to have more geography and less Palestinian demography. So houses are destroyed, people are kicked out, more settlements are built, and look what is happening in Sheikh Jarrah now, and all the Palestinian territory. The issue of ethnic cleansing is very clear. Where is the world, and where is the conscience of the world?
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm so with you. I pray and hope that the international community are going to respond to this. I really do. I think another aspect of the control about what you're saying about everyday life is the checkpoints. Could you just tell us a bit about that, please?
You know, checkpoints, there are many checkpoints in the West Bank, dividing governorate from other governorate. Bethlehem is separated from Hebron, from Jerusalem, from Nablus, and so on. And nowadays, actually, as a result of what is going on with the war on Gaza, you cannot move. In the past, we used to measure our distances by how many checkpoints we are crossing. Nowadays, it is dangerous to move from place to place. And a checkpoint is really not only dehumanizing people, but also preventing us from conducting our daily life, to go to our orchards, to go to our land, to go to visit our families, to go to hospitals, to go to schools. Checkpoints and the settlements and wall are ways to subjugate the Palestinian people and to dehumanize them and to steal their humanity, as well as to push them to be transferred. And it is many people are killed at checkpoints, and accusing them that they try to stab the army, the soldiers, and for security reasons, they say we have checkpoints. But this will not bring security to Israel. This will not bring any safety to anyone. It is rather human rights violation.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I remember going through the checkpoints with you, and it was such an anxious time. I was so scared, and I was trying not to look scared because I was with you and I didn't want to look scared, but it was awful, absolutely awful. I think we need to hand back to Jonathan now. Thank you so much, Zugbi. Thank you for being with us. Please don't leave just yet.
Yes, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Zugbi. We're now going to pause for a moment and watch some images, some historical, many current, and take time to reflect on some of these powerful stories and distressing information you've heard.
إلى خبز أمي وقهوتي ولمسة أمي أحن إلى خبز أمي وقهوتي ولمسة أمي وتكبر في الطفولة يوما على صدري يومي وتكبر في الطفولة يوما على صدري يومي وأعشق عمري لأني إذا مت أخجل من دمع أمي من دمع أمي. خذيني أمي إذا عدت يوما وشاحا لهدك خذيني أمي إذا عدت يوما وشاحا لهدك وغطي عظامي بعشب تعمد من طهر كعبك وغطي عظامي بعشب تعمد من طهر كعبك وشدي وثاقي بخصلة شعر بخيط يلوح في ذيل ثوبك بخيط يلوح في ذيل ثوبك عساني أصير إلها أصير عساني أصير إلها أصير إذا ما لمست قرارة قلبي أمي 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 أمي
And now Shireen Green, a trustee of the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions, will tell us about some of the practical ways you can respond to this ongoing Nakba.
This is going to be a double act between Nikki and me.
Hi, Shireen. Okay, so we know that there are so many things that people can do or get involved with that we thought this evening we would just suggest a few things because there are so many things out there, but do get yourself educated, find out as much as you can. There are lots of books, there are lots of newsletters, there are websites, there are blogs, and all of the following that we're going to mention do have these, and we're going to give you the links so you can get involved with those. The main thing we want to say is, if at all possible, that you should visit, go there, go and experience the place. That's the best way of learning about it. And also there's going to be a link if you want to know some more comprehensive listing, some more websites and things, you can contact Shireen. There will be an email address for her. So the first thing that Shireen wants to tell us about is B'Tselem. What is that, Shireen?
Oh, thanks for that, Nikki. It's an Israeli organization. It's an organization which takes care of the human rights of the Palestinians who live under occupation. And B'Tselem is the Hebrew for in the image of, because as you know, Orthodox Jews avoid saying the name of God, but it really means in the image of God, because these people insist on seeing their Palestinian neighbors as human beings, which, I mean, I've heard Palestinians being called cockroaches by Israelis. I mean, the racism is absolutely, well, it takes your breath away. So this is a fantastic website for anybody who's interested in getting to know more information. And information is absolutely key, because you're going to be trying, hopefully, to talk to people about what's going on. And you need to know what you're talking about. And a small dose of B'Tselem every so often will bring you up to speed with what's going on. They have brilliant short videos. One I looked at the other day was about the checkpoints. And they have stuff on international law, the settlements, and the separation barrier. And their statistics are impeccable. The last thing I want to say about B'Tselem is that very recently it's come out and called what's going on in Israel-Palestine apartheid. We've pussyfooted around this word for far too long. It is apartheid. Even the latest law in Israel, well, it was 2018, they passed the Jewish nation state law, which actually said that only Jews could have autonomy in Israel. It only put into law what was already the case, but now you can say apartheid, knowing that B'Tselem has used that term.
Thank you, thank you. That's a brilliant one. And then the next one we want to mention is Zaytun. So what do they do?
Zaytun is a not-for-profit organisation, and it imports hundreds of thousands of litres of Palestinian olive oil every year. And it's a wonderful organisation. I can't recommend it highly enough. I've been involved with Zaytun actually even before it started. And every year on Fair Trade Fortnight, they bring farmers over. They bring 2 farmers over from Palestine to the UK, and they tour in the UK. And I went to a reception once in London, a Zaytun reception, and there were bottles of Palestinian olive oil on every table. Every table had a bottle of Palestinian olive oil on it. And these 2 farmers, hoary sons of the soil, cried when they saw these bottles of their olive oil in London. I've got goosebumps just thinking about it.
Yeah.
And of course, it's become quite trendy when you're invited out to dinner to take a bottle of olive oil to your hosts instead of the traditional bottle of wine. Zaytun also does very, very informative monthly newsletters. I mean, there's a lot of recipes, as you might expect, but also it keeps you up to date with the farmers, what's happening to the farmers when all their baby olive trees get ripped up by the settlers and all that kind of stuff. It's really interesting. And then they also do tours. You can go out to, well, they do in normal times. Of course, nobody's doing many tours at the moment, but they go out every year they take people out to pick olives. And you might be rubbish at picking olives, but you will learn so much just by going on one of the tours.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's great stuff. What Zaytun do, it's very powerful. And yeah, I think I'd love to go on one of those tours. I just think doing that would just affect us all so much, wouldn't it? The last thing you were going to tell us about was Icad UK.
Yes, this is the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions. It does what it says on the tin. But their website is absolutely, the UK website, and also the Israeli one, but the website in the UK is absolutely bursting with up-to-date information, current campaigns. And one thing they do, which I think is really helpful to people who want to do stuff, they provide sample letters to MPs and to ministers and companies. And I think that's very, very useful. And Icad has come out for this idea. I was going to say it's a new idea, but actually it's a recycled idea. One democratic state campaign. Zugby knows all about that because he gave Jeff Halper a really hard time about it recently on a Serum Concern for Israel-Palestine event. But it's the idea that everybody between, from the river to the sea will enjoy equal rights. It's quite simple. The idea is simple, but Jeff Halper in his new book, which is called Decolonizing Israel, Liberating Palestine, shows how you can go about this. And the One Democratic State campaign has its own website, and it gives you 10 sort of lead into the way this could be brought about. The other thing that Icad does is they do alternative tours. And when I went out as a human rights monitor, I did one of their day tours. They do longer tours, but I did one of their day tours, and it was the best tour that I went on. It just shows you the occupation up close and personal. The name of Icad hints at the idea that people sit in front of bulldozers, and the famous Jeff Halper has certainly done that on more than one occasion and been hauled off to jail for it. But the other thing they do, which is the last thing I'm going to talk about, is they rebuild houses. So you get your house knocked down because you're a Palestinian and you're not allowed to have a house. So Icad come along and they bring people from all over the world on a summer camp to work with Palestinians and Israelis to rebuild the houses. Last year they couldn't do it. They couldn't bring people from around the world, but Israelis and Palestinians rebuilt a house. So I highly recommend B'Tselem, Zaytun, and Icad UK. Thank you for giving me the chance to say all that.
Thank you, Shireen, and we're going back to Jonathan now.
Thank you, Shireen and Nikki, and thank you to our other excellent and powerful speakers, Diana, Fayez, and Zugbi. We're coming to the end of our evening now. I'm going to end it with a prayer, and I'll hope you'll all join me in praying that the international community will wake up. We'll wake up after so many years slumbering to this ongoing crisis, and praying for peace and justice in Israel-Palestine. And I end with a final blessing. May the Lord bless and keep us. May the Lord make his face shine upon us, be gracious to us. The Lord turn his face to us and give us peace. And let us say, Amen.
Amen.
ضعيني إذا ما رجعت وقودا بتنور نارك يا أمي وحبل غسيل على سطح دارك ضعيني الوقوف بدون صلاة نهاري. لأني فقدت الوقوف بدون صلاة نهاري. لأن